The sun was setting when Catherine Miller spotted the first houses of Black Ridge. The mountainous landscape, painted in shades of orange and red by the evening light, brought a feeling of nostalgia that tightened her chest. After 5 years, working as a biologist in New York City, she was finally coming home. "I'm back," she whispered to herself as her car traveled the winding road. The last few months in the city had been suffocating. The frantic pace of the laboratory where she worked, the frustrated expectations of a promising career, and the constant noise of the metropolis had drained her energy. Biology, which had once been her passion, had transformed into an exhausting routine of reports and fierce competition. The decision to return to Black Ridge wasn't easy. It meant giving up the career she had built, the prestige of working in one of the country's leading research centers. But something inside her yearned for those mountains, for that pure air, for the silence of nature that had always been her true home. The car's engine began to falter as she approached the most isolated part of the road. Catherine tried to stay calm as the vehicle lost power until it stopped completely. She looked around, only the dense forest and the sky that was rapidly darkening. "Great. Welcome back," she said ironically, checking her phone only to confirm what she already knew: no signal. She got out of the car and immediately felt the characteristic aroma of the forest: moist earth, dense vegetation, freedom. She breathed deeply, closing her eyes for a moment. That smell brought memories of her childhood, of long walks with her grandmother Ruth through the forest, learning about each plant, each animal. The sound of an engine interrupted her thoughts. High beams approached on the deserted road. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Something didn't seem right. The vehicle, an imposing black pickup truck, slowed down as it approached. 3 men got out of the truck. The tallest, with an intimidating smile, approached her. "Car trouble, miss?" he asked, his falsely friendly tone contrasting with his cold eyes. "I'm fine, thank you. I already called for a tow truck," Catherine lied with a confidence she didn't feel. "There's no signal around here," the man retorted, moving closer. "We're from New Dawn. Perhaps you've heard of us? We're revolutionizing this backward region." Catherine instinctively stepped back. The name New Dawn had appeared in conversations with her grandmother in recent weeks, a company buying land in the region, promising economic development. The silence of the night was broken by a deep, profound sound, a roar that seemed to echo from the depths of the forest. The men stopped, looking nervously at the dense vegetation at the edge of the road. Catherine also felt fear growing inside her, but somehow that sound didn't seem entirely threatening to her. From the shadows between the trees emerged an imposing buffalo. Its black coat gleamed under the moonlight that was beginning to appear, and its eyes seemed fixed on the men. The animal advanced slowly, placing itself between Catherine and the unwanted visitors. "Let's go," muttered one of the men, visibly frightened. The tallest man hesitated for a moment, his gaze alternating between Catherine and the animal before retreating. "We'll see each other soon, Miss Miller," he said, pronouncing her surname in a way that made it clear he knew exactly who she was. Catherine watched in astonishment as the men hastily returned to their vehicle and departed. The buffalo remained motionless, like a silent guardian, until the pickup's headlights disappeared into the darkness. Then, to her surprise, the animal turned in her direction. There was no aggression in its movements. For a brief moment, Catherine could swear she saw understanding in those deep eyes. The buffalo slightly inclined its head, as if in a nod, before calmly returning to the darkness of the forest. Seconds later, as if by magic, her car's engine came back to life with a soft purr. Catherine quickly got into the vehicle, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. She looked one last time at the forest before departing, with the strange feeling that the encounter had not been mere coincidence. Her grandmother's small house, on the outskirts of town, was illuminated. When she arrived, Ruth Miller, a white-haired lady with an erect posture despite her 70 years, waited on the porch as if she knew exactly when her granddaughter would arrive. "You're late," she said simply, wrapping Catherine in a tight hug that smelled of herbs and freshly brewed coffee. "I had a setback on the road," Catherine replied, not knowing how to explain the strange encounter. Ruth served an herbal tea while Catherine recounted the strange encounter on the road, the yellowish light. In the kitchen cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls of the old house. The aroma of chamomile and rosemary filled the room, bringing a sense of comfort after the scare. "A buffalo?" Ruth asked, her wrinkled face showing more curiosity than surprise. "And you say it appeared exactly when those men approached you?" "Yes, Grandma. It was as if it were protecting me." Catherine hesitated, aware of how absurd it sounded. "I know it sounds crazy, but there was something different about that animal. The way it looked at me." Ruth remained silent for a few moments, her eyes fixed on the teacup, as if consulting the leaves at the bottom. "Nothing happens by chance. My child," she finally said, her voice carrying a weight that Catherine didn't fully understand. "The forest always speaks to us. The problem is that few people still know how to listen." Catherine observed her grandmother carefully. Despite her advanced age, Ruth maintained impressive vitality. Known in the region as the healer of the ridge, she was respected for her knowledge of medicinal plants and natural treatments. For Catherine, however, she had always been simply the grandmother who taught her to love and respect nature. "The men mentioned a company called New Dawn," Catherine commented, taking a sip of the comforting tea. "They knew my name." Ruth's expression visibly darkened. "They're buying land throughout the region," she explained, revealing unusual irritation. "They talk about progress, about transforming Black Ridge into a tourist hub. But what they really want is to exploit the forest until there's nothing left." "And what does that have to do with me? Why would they know who I am?" Ruth sighed deeply before answering. "Because our family has something they desire, Catherine. Something valuable that has been protected for generations." Before she could elaborate, knocks on the door interrupted the conversation. Ruth stood up with surprising agility for her age and went to answer. Catherine heard voices in the living room, and soon her grandmother returned, accompanied by a man who appeared to be about 35 years old. Tall, with disheveled dark hair and stubble, he wore simple clothes that contrasted with his striking presence. "This is Gabriel Mitchell," Ruth introduced. "He has been helping me protect the forest." "Gabriel, this is my granddaughter, Catherine. The biologist from New York," he completed, extending his hand. His green eyes studied Catherine intensely. "Your grandmother talks about you a lot." Catherine felt a slight blush rise to her cheeks as she shook Gabriel's hand. There was something magnetic about this man, an energy that seemed to reverberate with the forest itself. "Gabriel is a biologist too," Ruth explained, "but unlike you, he never abandoned his roots." "Grandma," Catherine protested, feeling the weight of the veiled criticism. "Don't worry," Gabriel intervened with an understanding smile. "Ruth just misses you. We all do." Something in the way he said "we all" intrigued Catherine. Who else would miss her besides her grandmother? She had lost touch with most of her childhood friends after moving to New York. "Gabriel came because we need to talk about what happened today," Ruth said, returning to her place at the table. "The encounter with the buffalo was no coincidence." The man nodded gravely. "The animals of the forest have been restless since New Dawn began circulating in the region," he explained. "They sense danger before we do." "Wait," Catherine raised, her hand interrupting him. "You're talking as if the animals were conscious, as if they were acting deliberately." "And aren't they?" Gabriel challenged, leaning forward. "What does your science say about animal consciousness, Dr. Miller?" Catherine felt challenged. "Science recognizes that animals have different levels of consciousness, of course, but to suggest that a buffalo appeared specifically to protect me. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of. In your philosophy," Gabriel quoted with a slight smile. Shakespeare knew what he was talking about. "What Gabriel is trying to say," Ruth intervened, "is that our family has a special connection with this land. A connection that spans generations." Catherine stared at her grandmother with growing confusion. "What kind of connection?" "The kind that New Dawn would do anything to control," Gabriel answered, his tone now serious. "They're not just interested in the commercial value of the land. They're after something much more precious." "And what would that be?" Ruth and Gabriel exchanged a significant look before her grandmother answered. "The heart of the ridge, Catherine." The source of energy that has kept this forest alive for thousands of years. The same energy that brought that buffalo to you today. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Through the window, Catherine could see the shadows of the forest moving. With the night breeze, she felt as if the trees themselves were listening to their conversation, waiting to see what she would do with that information. "Grandma, all this seems crazy," Ruth completed with an understanding smile. "I know it's hard to believe. You were trained to see the world through the lens of science. But there is ancient wisdom that science still can't fully explain." "And why tell me this now?" Catherine asked, still trying to process everything she was hearing. "Because you are the next guardian, Catherine," her grandmother answered simply. "And it's time for you to take your place." Morning arrived with a golden luminosity that filtered through the lace curtains of Catherine's bedroom. She had slept little, her mind filled with unanswered questions. Her grandmother's words echoed in her thoughts. "You are the next guardian." Guardian of what exactly? The so-called Heart of the Ridge sounded like something out of a mystical tale, not her scientific reality. Catherine considered herself a rational woman, educated at the best universities in the country. How could she accept these stories of mystical connections with nature? She got up and opened the curtains, letting the light flood the small room that remained exactly as it was when she left for New York. The biology books on the shelves, the microscope she received at 15, the forest photographs she had taken herself as a teenager. When she went down to the kitchen, she found only a note from Ruth. "Went to the market. Coffee is ready. Take the day to reconnect with the forest." Catherine smiled. Her grandmother had always been direct. After coffee, she decided to follow the advice and went out for a walk. The house was on the edge of town, practically surrounded by the forest. A familiar trail began just behind the backyard, winding up the mountain. Her feet remembered the path even after so many years. The aroma of vegetation, the sound of birds, the light filtered through the treetops. Everything awakened dormant memories. She remembered childhood afternoons when Ruth would take her to learn about each plant, each creature in the forest. "Everything is connected," she murmured, repeating the mantra her grandmother always said. "Each leaf, each insect, each drop of dew is part of the same web." The trail led her to a small clearing where a crystalline stream cut through the landscape. Catherine sat on a rock by the water, closing her eyes to absorb that peace. That's when she felt a presence. She didn't immediately open her eyes, as there was no fear, just an inexplicable certainty that she wasn't alone. When she finally looked, she saw the same buffalo from the previous night, standing at the edge of the clearing, observing her with its deep eyes. "Hello again," said Catherine, surprised not to feel afraid. The animal slightly inclined its head, as if recognizing her, and took a few steps in her direction. It stopped a few meters away, lowering its muzzle to drink water from the stream. "You protected me yesterday," she continued, feeling somewhat foolish for talking to an animal. "I don't know how or why, but thank you." The buffalo raised its head, water droplets running from its muzzle, and their gazes met. Catherine felt a strange current of energy course through her body, as if an invisible connection was forming between them. In her mind, images began to appear, the forest seen from different angles, trails she had never traveled, a cave among rocks. The animal slowly moved away, stopping only to look back, as if inviting her to follow. Catherine hesitated for only a moment before standing up. "This is crazy," she murmured to herself as she began to follow the buffalo deeper into the forest. The animal guided her along paths she had never seen before, moving away from known trails. The vegetation became denser, older. Centennial trees rose like silent sentinels, their trunks covered with mosses and lichens. The air seemed different there, denser, charged with a palpable energy. After almost an hour of walking, they reached a rock formation that rose abruptly from the forest. The buffalo stopped before a gap between the rocks, the entrance to a cave. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. This was exactly the place she had seen in her mind moments before. The animal waited, as if expecting a decision. Catherine looked at the dark opening, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination. Her rational mind told her to retreat, not to enter an unknown cave guided only by a wild animal. But something deeper, more instinctive, impelled her to proceed. "All right," she finally said, taking a step forward. "I'll trust you." The entrance to the cave was narrow, but soon opened into a larger space. Catherine used her phone's flashlight to illuminate the way. The rocky walls were covered with ancient symbols, drawings that resembled animals, plants, and stylized human figures. "These are cave paintings," she murmured, fascinated. "They must be thousands of years old." As she advanced, she noticed that the cave was getting strangely brighter, even without an apparent source of light. A bluish glow emanated from the walls, intensifying as she proceeded. The tunnel opened into a large central chamber, and Catherine stopped, amazed at what she saw. In the center, emerging from the cave floor itself, grew a tree unlike any she had ever seen. Its trunk was thick and twisted, made of a wood that seemed almost silver. Its leaves emitted a soft bluish glow, illuminating the entire chamber. The sea. Buffalo had disappeared, but Catherine barely noticed its absence, so absorbed was she in the vision of the luminous tree. She approached slowly, feeling the energy of the place vibrate around her. When she was a few steps away, she instinctively extended her hand. Her fingers barely touched the trunk when a surge of energy coursed through her body. Images flooded her mind, the forest in different seasons over centuries, people who seemed to be her ancestors, including her grandmother when young, touching that same tree. Various animals, including the buffalo, receiving and transmitting that mysterious energy. Catherine fell to her knees, breathless from the intensity of the experience. When she finally managed to compose herself, she realized that something had changed. She could feel the forest in a completely new way. Each tree, each animal, the flow of underground water, the movement of wind through the leaves. It was as if her senses had expanded to embrace the entire ecosystem. "The heart of the ridge," she whispered, finally understanding. It wasn't an object, but this living connection, this energy that permeated everything. When she left the cave, the sun was already beginning to set. She should have been disoriented after hours in the unfamiliar forest, but surprisingly, she knew exactly where she was and how to return. More than that, she could feel every living being around her, as if they were extensions of herself. When she arrived home, she found Ruth and Gabriel on the porch, both with worried expressions that transformed into relief upon seeing her. "You found it," said Ruth, not as a question, but a statement. Catherine nodded, still processing everything she had experienced. "How did you know?" "Your eyes," Gabriel answered, observing her intensely. "They change after the first contact. They shine in a different way." "What happened to me?" asked Catherine, feeling transformed in a way she couldn't explain. "You awakened to who you truly are," answered Ruth, taking her hands between her own. "And now your true journey begins." Thomas Madison's office, president of New Dawn Enterprises, occupied the top floor of the only modern building in Black Ridge. Through the large glass windows, he observed the small town and the forest that surrounded it with the calculating gaze of someone who sees only numbers and potential profit. "So?" he asked the tall man who had been on the road the night before. "Confirm that she's back?" Richard Cross, his head of security, nodded. "Catherine Miller arrived yesterday. We had a brief encounter on the road, but we were interrupted." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Interrupted by whom?" Richard hesitated, embarrassed. "Not by whom, but by something. A buffalo appeared out of nowhere, sir. It seemed to be protecting her." "A buffalo?" Thomas laughed, incredulous. "And you, an ex-military man, were intimidated by a farm animal?" "It wasn't an ordinary animal," Richard insisted, trying to maintain his composure. "There was something different about it, something unsettling." Thomas sighed, returning to contemplate the view. These locals and their superstitions. That's why this region has remained stagnant for so long. He turned to face his subordinate. "I don't care if a buffalo, an elephant, or a dinosaur appeared. We need those lands, and the only person who refuses to sell is Ruth Miller. Now that her granddaughter is back, our situation could get complicated. Why exactly? Because Catherine Miller isn't just the healer's granddaughter. She's a respected scientist with contacts in New York. If she decides to investigate our project, she might discover our true intentions. Richard nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. And what are your orders? For now, just observe. I want to know every step Dr. Miller takes, who she talks to, where she goes, what she discovers. Thomas paused, his gaze hardening. And find a way to accelerate our acquisition of the old woman's property. Time is running against us. Meanwhile, at Ruth's house, Catherine was trying to understand the changes she felt since the encounter in the cave. Sitting at the kitchen table with Gabriel and her grandmother, she was relating the extraordinary experience. It's as if I could feel everything around me, she explained, searching for words to describe the sensation. The trees, the animals, even the soil. It's as if everything were connected by an invisible network, and now I'm part of that network. Gabriel nodded, understanding. Most people spend their entire lives looking at the forest as something separate from themselves. What you experienced was the dissolution of that illusory barrier. But why me? Questioned Catherine. Why our family? Ruth got up and went to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. From it she removed a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed by time. This diary belonged to my great-grandmother, Helen, she explained, carefully placing the book on the table. She was the first in our lineage to document her connection with the heart of the ridge. Catherine delicately opened the diary, observing the elegant calligraphy that filled the pages. Detailed drawings of plants, animals, and mystical symbols interspersed the texts. She recognized some of the symbols she had seen on the cave walls. According to Helen, continued Ruth, our family descends from the first guardians of this land, long before colonization. The heart of the ridge chooses its guardians, people capable of understanding its language and protecting its power. And what is this power exactly? Asked Catherine, still skeptical despite everything she had experienced. Life, Gabriel answered simply. The ability to nurture, heal, and restore natural balance. That's why your grandmother is known as the best healer in the region. Catherine looked at Ruth with new eyes. She had always known that her grandmother had impressive medicinal knowledge, but she had attributed this to decades of experience with herbs and natural remedies. Now she was beginning to realize that there was much more behind this knowledge. So all these years, said Catherine, when you taught me about plants, about the forest, it wasn't just knowledge of medicinal herbs. Ruth smiled affectionately. It was knowledge, yes, but also preparation. I knew that one day you would awaken to your true purpose. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. What do you mean? Gabriel intervened. Normally, the awakening occurs gradually, over years of learning and connection with the forest. The fact that you awakened in a single encounter suggests urgency. Urgency caused by New Dawn? Questioned Catherine. Precisely, confirmed Gabriel. They're not just interested in the commercial value of the lands. Somehow they discovered the heart of the ridge and its power. Ruth nodded gravely. In recent months, there have been signs, animals that never approached, the town appearing in broad daylight, as if seeking refuge, plants blooming out of season. The very energetic structure of the forest is changing, as if trying to resist an invasion. And what do they intend to do with this power? Asked Catherine. The same thing they do with everything, Gabriel answered, his voice laden with bitterness. Exploit until it's exhausted. The power of the heart of the ridge could revolutionize medicine, agriculture, even energy production. In the right hands, it would be a blessing for humanity. In the hands of New Dawn. His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Catherine felt a shiver run down her spine. What she had experienced in the cave was something too precious to be commercially exploited. At first I thought they were just another conglomerate interested in building resorts and theme parks, Gabriel continued. But the more I investigate, the more I discover that New Dawn has deep connections with pharmaceutical industries and bioengineering laboratories. Then we need to stop them, concluded Catherine firmly. But how? A sound at the window attracted the attention of the three. A robin had landed on the windowsill, its song surprisingly loud and insistent. Catherine immediately felt a connection with the small bird, as if she could understand its agitation. "Something is happening in the forest," she said, rising abruptly. "We need to go now." Gabriel and Ruth exchanged surprised looks, but followed Catherine without questioning. As they approached the edge of the forest, other animals began to appear. Squirrels, agoutis, even a couple of howler monkeys that normally avoided human contact. "They're agitated," observed Gabriel. "As if they were fleeing from something," Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, trying to tune into the energy that now flowed through her body. Images appeared in her mind. Heavy machinery, trees being felled, men with scientific equipment collecting plant samples. "Northeast of here," she said, opening her eyes. "They're cutting down trees near the main stream." "Impossible," protested Ruth. "That area is protected by law. They wouldn't have authorization to touch those trees." "Since when would that stop them?" Gabriel retorted, his face tense with concern. "Let's check." The trio advanced rapidly through the forest, guided by Catherine, who seemed to know intuitively each trail, each detour. As they approached the indicated area, the sound of chainsaws confirmed their fears. Hidden behind a dense group of bushes, they observed the alarming scene. Men in New Dawn uniforms were felling centennial trees, while others collected samples of soil, water, and vegetation. At the center of the operation, supervising everything, was Thomas Madison in person. "This is an environmental crime," whispered Gabriel, his indignation evident. "Those trees are over 200 years old. They are part of a protected reserve." Catherine felt something awaken inside her, a protective fury, primitive, fueled by the new connection she felt with the forest. Each chainsaw cut felt like a wound in her own body. Without thinking of the consequences, she rose from her hiding place and advanced toward the clearing where the men were working. "Catherine, no," called Ruth, but it was too late. The biologist emerged from the bushes, confronting Thomas Madison with a courage she didn't even know she possessed. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice laden with authority. "This is an area of permanent preservation. You have no right to touch these trees." Thomas Madison didn't seem surprised to see Catherine. On the contrary, a calculated smile formed on his lips as he gestured for the workers to momentarily stop the chainsaws. "Dr. Catherine Miller," he greeted with false cordiality. "What a pleasure to finally meet you. Your reputation in the field of biology is impressive." Catherine wasn't intimidated by the apparent politeness. "I can't say the same about you or your company. What you're doing here is illegal, and you know it." Thomas casually adjusted his wristwatch, his relaxed posture contrasting with the tension in the air. "Actually, we have all the necessary authorizations," he responded, removing some documents from a folder and extending them to her. "Environmental license, impact studies, all signed and stamped by the competent authorities." Catherine examined the papers, her heart sinking upon seeing that they indeed seemed to be in order. However, something wasn't right. She knew enough about environmental legislation to know that an authorization to deforest that specific area would never be legitimately granted. "These documents are fraudulent," she stated, returning them with disdain. "No environmental technician who knows this region would approve the deforestation of centennial trees in a watershed area." Gabriel and Ruth approached, positioning themselves beside Catherine. Thomas cast an evaluative look at Gabriel, and something like recognition gleamed in his eyes. "Are the famous Professor Gabriel Mitchell," he commented with irony. "Still trying to save the world one tree at a time? I thought after the fiasco with your last scientific article you would have learned to stay away from the spotlight." Catherine gave Gabriel a questioning look, who maintained a firm expression, though a tense muscle in his jaw betrayed his discomfort. "This is not the time for provocations, Madison," Gabriel responded. "You know very well that what you're doing here goes beyond simple deforestation for construction." Thomas laughed, but there was a dangerous gleam in his gaze. "And what exactly do you think we're doing, Professor?" "Building a secret base, looking for aliens." He turned to the workers. "Continue the work. We have deadlines to meet." The sound of chainsaws once again filled the air, each cut making Catherine shudder as if she felt the pain of the trees themselves. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to channel the new energy flowing within her. She felt life pulsating around her, the silent resistance of the trees, the fear of small hidden animals, the indignation of the earth itself. When she opened her eyes, something had changed in her gaze. A fierce determination, almost supernatural, made Thomas instinctively step back. "You don't understand what you're meddling with, do you?" said Catherine, her voice strangely calm amid the chaos. "This forest isn't just a collection of trees and animals. It's a living, connected, conscious organism, and it won't allow itself to be destroyed without resistance." As if responding to her words, the sky, previously clear, suddenly darkened. Heavy clouds formed with impressive speed over the clearing. A strong wind began to blow, violently shaking the branches of the surrounding trees. The workers stopped, looking up with apprehensive expressions. Some began to gather their equipment, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden weather change. "Just a summer storm," Thomas assured, trying to maintain control of the situation, though he himself seemed uneasy. "Keep working." At that moment, lightning cut across the sky, striking a nearby tree with impressive precision. The boom was deafening, making everyone instinctively duck. The forest animals, previously silent and hidden, began to manifest. Birds flew. In circles, small mammals ran in organized patterns as if participating in a chaotic but coordinated ballet. Ruth placed her hand on Catherine's shoulder. "Control, my child," she murmured. "You don't fully master your connection yet. The forest is responding to your emotions." Catherine looked at her grandmother, surprised. She hadn't realized that the sudden storm was somehow linked to her. She breathed deeply, trying to calm her inner fury. Slowly the wind diminished, and the clouds began to dissipate. Thomas observed the scene with a mixture of astonishment and calculating fascination, his gaze fixed on Catherine, then on Ruth, as if connecting invisible dots. "So the rumors are true," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "Impressive." He made a gesture to Richard, who quickly approached. "Pack everything up," he ordered. "We'll continue another day." "But sir, the deadlines—" "Don't argue," Thomas cut him off. "We have what we needed for today." As the workers turned off the chainsaws and gathered their equipment, Thomas turned to Catherine with an enigmatic smile. "This little demonstration was educational, Dr. Miller, but don't think it's over. On the contrary, we're just beginning." Before she could respond, Thomas moved away toward a vehicle parked at the edge of the clearing. Richard remained behind, supervising the workers' withdrawal, his vigilant gaze never leaving the trio. When they were finally alone in the partially devastated clearing, Catherine felt her legs weaken. Gabriel supported her before she fell, guiding her to a fallen log where she could sit. "What happened to me?" she asked, trembling. "That storm, now was it me who caused it?" "Not exactly you," Ruth explained, sitting beside her. "It was the heart of the ridge acting through you. Your connection is still new, unstable. Your intense emotions served as a channel for the forest's energy." "But that's impossible," stammered Catherine, the scientist within her still struggling to rationalize the phenomenon. "Impossible according to the science, you know," Gabriel pondered, squatting in front of her. "But there are forces in nature that Western science has only begun to understand. Indigenous peoples and traditional communities have known and respected these forces for millennia." Catherine looked around at the felled trees, feeling a deep sorrow for not having arrived in time to prevent the destruction. "What did Thomas mean about your scientific article?" she suddenly asked, remembering the businessman's provocation. Gabriel sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. 3 years ago, I published an article on bioenergetic anomalies in protected ecosystems. I documented inexplicable phenomena, accelerated regeneration rates, plants with amplified medicinal properties, coordinated behaviors between different species. Essentially, I was scientifically documenting what you experience today. And what happened? I was ridiculed by the scientific community. They called my work New Age pseudoscience. The university where I taught gently suggested I take a sabbatical year. His expression turned somber. But the worst came afterward. I received a proposal from New Dawn to continue my research with full funding and no restrictions. And you refused, Catherine concluded. Not immediately, Gabriel admitted, ashamed. The offer was tempting, cutting-edge laboratories, staff, unlimited resources, but when I understood what they really wanted, that they intended to commercially exploit the power of the heart of the ridge, I left the project. Since then, I've been working with your grandmother to protect this place. Ruth, who had been examining the cut trees, returned with a serious expression. They weren't just cutting trees, she said, showing strange marks on the trunks. They were extracting specific samples. See these perforations? They're collections of sap and cambial tissue. What would they be used for? Asked Catherine. Genetic analysis, probably, Gabriel answered. These trees are special. They grow close to the heart of the ridge, absorb its energy. Their DNA may contain secrets that New Dawn intends to exploit. Catherine stood up, a new determination arising amid the exhaustion. We need to stop them, not just for this forest, but for everything it represents. She looked firmly at Gabriel and her grandmother. What do we do now? First, you need to complete your training, Ruth answered. What happened today was just a glimpse of your potential as a guardian, but you need to learn to control and direct that power. And meanwhile, I'll investigate more about New Dawn's true plans, Gabriel added. I still have some contacts inside the company who can provide valuable information. A sound in the vegetation caught the attention of the three. For a moment, Catherine feared that one of Thomas's men had stayed behind, spying on them. But what emerged from the bushes was the same buffalo that had guided her to the cave. The animal approached with deliberate steps, its deep gaze fixed on Catherine. He came for you, said Ruth, observing the animal with respect. Guardians often develop bonds with forest animals. They become guides, protectors, messengers. The buffalo stopped before Catherine, slightly inclining its head as if in reverence. She extended her hand hesitantly, touching the rough fur between its horns. Immediately she felt the connection strengthen, as if a channel of communication opened between them. His name is Thunder, murmured Catherine, surprised at the certainty she felt. He's here to guide me. The following weeks were of intense transformation for Catherine. Under Ruth's guidance, she immersed herself in learning the ancestral secrets of her family. Each morning began with meditation by the stream, where she learned to synchronize her breathing with the flow of water. In the afternoons, she studied Helen's diary and other ancient manuscripts kept for generations, and when the sun set, she practiced controlling her connection with the heart of the ridge. The energy isn't yours to command, Ruth explained as they walked through the forest. You are merely a channel, a bridge between worlds. Learn to flow with it, not to control it. Thunder, the buffalo that had become her guide, frequently accompanied them on these walks, keeping a respectful distance, but always vigilant. His constant presence provided Catherine with a sense of security and connection with the forest that she had never experienced before. On a particularly hot afternoon, while they were practicing identifying medicinal plants, Catherine noticed something unusual, a small seedling no bigger than her pinky finger, growing in an unlikely location, a crack between rocks where there was barely any soil. This plant shouldn't be here, she observed, crouching to examine it better. The soil is practically non-existent, there's not enough water. Touch it, Ruth instructed with an enigmatic smile. When Catherine delicately placed her finger on the small leaf, she felt a familiar tingling running up her arm. The plant seemed to respond to her touch, rising slightly toward her. It's a manifestation of your bond with the forest, her grandmother explained. Some plants will begin to grow around you, attracted by the energy that now flows through you. They are natural sentinels, protectors. How will I be able to defend the forest against New Dawn? Asked Catherine, contemplating the fragility of the small seedling. They have money, influence, technology. And we have this, Ruth answered, gesturing to the vast greenery around them. The oldest and most resilient force on this planet. Don't underestimate the power of life itself, my child. Back in town, Gabriel was conducting his own battle. Using his contacts and scientific knowledge, he investigated New Dawn's true intentions. On a rainy afternoon, he appeared at Ruth's house soaking wet and with a grave expression. "I discovered what they're planning," he announced, spreading documents over the kitchen table as soon as he entered, "and it's worse than we imagined." Papers contained complex chemical formulas, molecular diagrams, and laboratory reports. Catherine examined them with growing concern. "These are analyses of biocompounds extracted from trees near the heart of the ridge," she explained, her scientific training allowing her to decipher the information. "They've identified molecules with incredible properties: accelerated cellular regeneration, amplified energy production, enhanced intercellular communication. The power of life in its purest form," Gabriel agreed. "But see what they're using this knowledge for." He pointed to another document, detailing practical applications of the discoveries. Catherine felt her blood freeze as she read the project's objectives: development of proprietary compounds for medical, agricultural, and energy applications, with global monetization potential estimated in billions. "They're patenting life itself," she murmured, horrified, "transforming ancestral knowledge into private property." "And that's not all," Gabriel continued, showing another report. "This is the real reason they want your grandmother's property. The geological studies indicate that the central point of the heart of the ridge, the source of energy that permeates the entire forest, is located exactly under these lands." "The tree in the cave," concluded Ruth. "It's the physical core of the energy network. If they gain direct access to it," Catherine began. "They could extract and exploit its power on an industrial scale," Gabriel completed. "And in the process, they'll destroy the balance that took millennia to establish." Thunder, who was resting in the backyard, emitted a deep sound, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Catherine approached the window, observing the buffalo with a lump in her throat. The bond between them had strengthened each day, and now she could feel the animal's apprehension as if it were her own. "We need a plan," she finally said, turning to Gabriel and Ruth. "Something more concrete than just passive resistance. If Thomas Madison is willing to forge official documents, I doubt he'll stop at any legal obstacle we might create." Gabriel nodded, thoughtful. "I have an idea, but it's risky, and it will require you to use your new powers in a way you haven't tried yet." Before he could elaborate, insistent knocks sounded at the front door. Ruth went to answer and returned accompanied by Claire, a young journalist from the small local newspaper. "Sorry for the interruption," said Claire, clearly agitated, "but I thought you should know. The City Council approved in an extraordinary session the expropriation of several areas in the region for a project of public interest. Your property is on the list." "Expropriation?" exclaimed Ruth. "They can't do that. This land has been in our family for generations." "Apparently they can," Claire replied, handing them a copy of the meeting minutes. "The vote was lightning fast, without prior notice, and the justification is the construction of a center for ecological research and sustainable tourism. All very beautiful on paper, of course." Gabriel examined the document, his face contorting into an expression of disgust. "This has Thomas's fingerprints all over it. Bribery, intimidation, he spares no effort." Catherine felt anger growing inside her, and with it, a strange vibration in the air around her. Small objects on the table, a salt shaker, pens, keys, began to subtly tremble. Ruth placed her hand on her arm, a silent gesture for her to calm down. "When does the expropriation process begin?" asked Catherine, breathing deeply to control her emotions. "In theory, immediately," Claire answered, "but there are still bureaucratic procedures that can delay the process for a few weeks, maybe a month." "A month," repeated Catherine. "We have a month to prevent them from taking not just our home, but the heart of this entire forest." Claire looked confusedly from one face to another. "What exactly are we talking about here? I know this land is important to you, but it seems like more than that." The three exchanged hesitant looks. Finally, Catherine made a decision. "Claire, what I'm going to tell you seems incredible, but I need you to keep an open mind. And more importantly, I need you to help us spread the truth." During the next hour, Catherine explained to the journalist about the heart of the ridge, her family's ancestral connection with the forest, and New Dawn's true plans. To her surprise, Claire showed no skepticism. "My grandmother was indigenous," explained the young journalist. "She talked about the consciousness of forests, about how everything is connected. I always believed, even when others laughed at these ideas." "So you'll help us?" asked Gabriel. "The newspaper has limited reach," Claire pondered, "but I have contacts in larger outlets in New York. If we can get concrete evidence of New Dawn's intentions, we can create public pressure." "Evidence will be difficult," observed Gabriel. "Everything I got were unofficial copies obtained through, let's say, unconventional means." "What if we showed them?" Catherine suddenly suggested. "Show them what?" questioned Ruth. "The heart of the ridge. If we can take journalists, scientists, influential people to the cave, make them see with their own eyes what's at stake." "It's very risky," Gabriel warned. "You would be exposing the secret that your family has protected for generations." "Sometimes the best way to protect a secret is to transform it into public knowledge," Catherine argued. "If everyone knows about the heart of the ridge, if they understand its importance, it will be much harder for New Dawn to exploit its power in secret." Ruth remained silent for long moments, her face revealing the internal conflict between the tradition of secrecy and the urgent need for protection. "My great-grandmother Helen wrote in her diary that one day the time would come when the Guardians would need to choose between hiding knowledge or sharing it with the world," she finally said. "She predicted that this decision would fall to the fifth Guardian, you, Catherine." A distant thunder echoed, as if nature itself were responding to the tension of the moment. Through the window, Catherine saw Thunder raise his head, his eyes fixed on the forest. "Something was happening. Something is approaching," she murmured, feeling a tingling at the base of her neck. "Something wrong." Gabriel ran to the window and cursed softly. "Trucks," he said. "Several of them, coming up the road toward the area we visited the other day." "But it's night," protested Claire. "What kind of legitimate operation happens at this hour?" "One that doesn't want witnesses," Gabriel grimly replied. Catherine felt panic growing, not just inside her, but in the entire forest around them. It was as if every tree, every animal, every leaf trembled in anticipation of an imminent danger. The bond she had cultivated in recent weeks now transmitted a silent cry for help. "They're going to the heart," she said with absolute certainty. "Somehow they discovered the location of the cave." "How is that possible?" questioned Ruth. "Only the Guardians know the way." The answer came as a sudden revelation, a clear image in her mind. The small hidden camera she hadn't noticed, attached to a tree trunk near the cave entrance. She had been followed, observed. "We need to go now," she declared, already heading for the door. "We don't have a month. We have tonight." The darkness of night enveloped the forest like a cloak, making the trail almost invisible to ordinary eyes. But Catherine no longer needed light to see the path. The connection with the heart of the ridge gave her a perception that went beyond conventional senses. Each tree, each stone, each living being emitted a unique energetic signature that she could identify as luminous points in her consciousness. "This way," she directed, guiding Gabriel, Ruth, and Claire along an alternative path that avoided the main road where New Dawn's trucks had been spotted. Thunder followed alongside the group, his enormous body moving with surprising agility and silence between the trees. Occasionally, the buffalo would stop, raising his head as if capturing invisible signals, before resuming the march with renewed determination. "How did you know they discovered the cave?" asked Claire, trying to keep up with the accelerated pace of the others. "The forest showed me," Catherine answered simply. "It's hard to explain, but I can feel when something threatens the balance. And at this moment there's a growing disturbance, like waves spreading from the center." As they approached the mountainous region where the cave was hidden, distant sounds of heavy machinery confirmed their fears. Artificial light cut through the natural darkness of the forest, wounding the night with its invasive presence. The group crouched behind moss-covered rocks, observing the alarming scene before them. A large-scale operation was underway. Excavators, generators, powerful spotlights, and dozens of men working under the supervision of Thomas Madison and Richard Cross. "They've already found the entrance," whispered Gabriel, pointing to where a group of technicians with sophisticated equipment was concentrating. "Those are geoscientists with subterranean mapping devices." "And those?" asked Claire, indicating another group that was assembling what looked like medical or laboratory equipment. "Molecular biologists," Catherine identified, recognizing some of the apparatus from her own work in New York. "They're prepared to extract and analyze samples on site." Ruth held her granddaughter's hand, her expression laden with concern. "If they reach the central tree, if they damage it in any way." "The balance will break," Catherine completed, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "Not just this forest, but the entire network of life connected to it will suffer the impact." "We need a plan," insisted Gabriel. "We can't simply advance against them. There are too many, and they're armed." Catherine closed her eyes, seeking guidance in the new consciousness that now dwelled within her. She felt the presence of the forest as a living, pulsating entity, reacting to the imminent danger. But there wasn't just fear. There was also determination, resistance, a collective will to survive that transcended any individual species. "The forest will help us," she finally said, opening her eyes with renewed conviction. "But we need to be the catalyst." She quickly explained her plan. It was bold, dangerous, and depended on factors that conventional science would consider impossible. But no one in the group questioned. They had witnessed enough in recent weeks to know that the limits of the possible had been redefined. "Claire," Catherine instructed, handing the journalist her phone. "Stay here and record everything. Photograph, film, document every action they take. If our plan doesn't work, this evidence will be our last hope." "But I want to help," protested Claire. "You are helping," Catherine assured. "What we're about to do is risky, and we need someone to survive to tell the story no matter what happens." Gabriel handed Claire a small device. "This is an amplified signal transmitter. As soon as you've recorded enough, use it to send the images to my contacts in New York. They'll know what to do." Ruth, who had been silent, removed several small bags containing herbs and powders of different colors from a leather pouch. "This will give us some protection," she explained, handing one to each of them. "Place it close to your body, near your heart." Gabriel and Catherine positioned themselves on opposite sides of the clearing where the operation was happening, ready for the signal. Ruth remained in the center, slightly recessed, her aged but firm hands preparing a mixture of herbs that emanated a potent aroma. Thunder, the buffalo, had surprisingly disappeared, but Catherine wasn't worried. She instinctively knew that the animal was fulfilling its part in the invisible plan that was unfolding. The decisive moment came when the machines finally fully opened the cave entrance, revealing the tunnel that led to the sanctuary of the heart of the ridge. Thomas, visibly excited, led a select group of scientists and security guards inside, carrying collection and analysis equipment. "Now," murmured Catherine, though she knew she didn't need to speak aloud to be heard by her allies. Gabriel quickly lit a series of small fires strategically positioned around the perimeter. The fire, fed by Ruth's special herbs, produced a dense and aromatic smoke that spread with surprising speed, enveloping the entire operation area. The workers stopped, confused by the sudden atmospheric change. Some began to cough, others rubbed their eyes, disoriented. But it wasn't just the smoke affecting them. It was the energy that Catherine now deliberately channeled through her body, amplified by Ruth's ancestral knowledge. The biologist remained motionless, her palms turned toward the earth, feeling the connection with the heart of the ridge, strengthening with each breath. She visualized invisible roots extending from her feet into the soil, penetrating deeply, finding the lines of energy that permeated the forest. In response to her silent call, the earth began to tremble. Not a violent earthquake, but a rhythmic, constant vibration, like the pulsing of a giant heart. The heavy equipment began to sink slightly into the suddenly softened soil. Electrical cables were broken by roots that unexpectedly emerged from the ground. Generators failed, without apparent explanation. Richard Cross, realizing something supernatural was happening, quickly organized a group of security guards. "Someone must be causing this," he shouted. "Spread out and find them!" But the search was interrupted by a sound that froze the blood of all present. A chorus of roars, howls, and calls from dozens of different animals approaching from all directions. From the shadows between the trees emerged wolves, jaguars, tapirs, capybaras, and countless other species. Normally shy and solitary, now moving like a unified army. At the front of all, majestic and imposing, was Thunder. The buffalo advanced to the center of the clearing, his eyes fixed on the men who had invaded the sanctuary. The workers panicked, abandoning equipment and running toward the vehicles. The few security guards who tried to use weapons discovered to their amazement that none worked. The ammunition was inexplicably damp, the mechanisms jammed. Inside the cave, Thomas Madison and his elite team continued oblivious to the external chaos, advancing rapidly through the tunnel, illuminated by powerful lanterns. The businessman felt adrenaline running through his veins. He was about to get his hands on the prize he had pursued for years, ever since he heard the first rumors about the unique regenerative power of the Black Ridge Forest. When they finally reached the central chamber, the vision of the luminous tree elicited exclamations of astonishment, even from the most skeptical scientists. Its ethereal beauty, its pulsating glow, the almost physical sensation of energy emanating from each leaf. It was more impressive than anyone could have imagined. "Start collecting samples of everything," Thomas ordered, approaching the tree with an almost reverent expression. "Bark, leaves, sap, I want complete analyses by today." One of the scientists hesitated. "Sir, perhaps we should be more cautious. This ecosystem is clearly unique, and any interference could—" "I don't pay you to have scruples, Doctor," Thomas coldly cut him off. "I pay you to extract knowledge that we can transform into patents and products. Now do your job." While the scientists reluctantly prepared collection equipment, Thomas took a small knife from his pocket and approached the luminous trunk. Before anyone could stop him, he made a deep cut in the silvery bark. A thick liquid glowing like living mercury flowed from the open wound in the tree. At the same instant, a violent tremor shook the entire cave. Stones began to fall from the ceiling, and a wave of invisible but palpable energy spread like a silent explosion. On the surface, Catherine felt the tree's pain as if it were her own. A scream escaped her lips, and she fell to her knees, hands pressed against her chest. The connection was so deep that the wound in the heart of the ridge reverberated in her own being. "Thirsty wonder. Vinci Turpin wonder. They've struck it," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "We need to act now, or it will be too late." With a supreme effort, she rose again. Ruth and Gabriel ran to her side, forming a triangle around the cave entrance. The elderly healer began to intone a chant in an ancient language, her hands tracing symbols in the air. Gabriel, following instructions he had received earlier, removed from his backpack a crystal that Ruth had given him, a stone that had been in the family for generations, imbued with the energy of the heart of the ridge. Catherine closed her eyes, concentrating on the energy flowing through her, no longer trying to control it, but surrendering completely, becoming a pure channel for the will of the forest itself. She felt her body become lighter, almost translucent, as if she were dissolving into the web of life that connected everything around her. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with a bluish light, the same that emanated from the sacred tree. She raised her hands to the night sky, and the clouds responded, gathering in a vortex above the clearing. Lightning danced between the dark formations, and the air charged with static electricity. In a movement that seemed choreographed, all the animals gathered around the clearing raised their voices in a unison chorus. The sound reverberated through the forest, penetrating the earth, crossing stone and soil until it reached the subterranean chamber where Thomas and his team struggled to maintain balance amid the growing tremors. "What's happening?" shouted one of the scientists, holding onto equipment to avoid falling. "Probably a localized earthquake," replied another, though his tone revealed that even he didn't believe the explanation. Thomas, still holding the knife stained with the glowing sap of the tree, felt an ancestral fear growing inside him. Something was responding to his intrusion, something ancient and powerful that would not easily submit to human exploitation. "Gather what you can and let's get out of here," he ordered, trying to keep his voice firm. Too late. A final tremor, more violent than the previous ones, caused the cave ceiling to begin to collapse. Blocks of stone fell around the group, raising clouds of dust. The exit was being rapidly blocked. On the surface, Catherine felt the forest executing its own defense. It wasn't vengeance or anger, just the natural immune system of a living organism isolating a threat, sealing it to prevent greater damage. Morning arrived slowly, as if the light itself hesitated to reveal the consequences of the previous night. The first rays of sun found Catherine still in the clearing, exhausted but vigilant, her eyes fixed on the cave entrance now completely sealed by rocks and dense vegetation that had grown with supernatural speed. Gabriel approached, offering her a thermos with hot tea. "Any sign of them?" he asked, observing the rock formation that didn't exist the day before. Catherine shook her head, sipping the comforting liquid. "The cave isolated them completely, not by my will, but by the forest's own decision." She closed her eyes for an instant, tuning into the energy that now flowed freely through her body. "They're alive, I can feel their presences, like luminous points under the earth." And the tree. Wounded, but recovering, the forest is redirecting energy to heal it. Ruth joined them, leaning slightly on a walking stick. The night had demanded much of her strength, but her eyes shone with quiet satisfaction. "The balance is restoring itself," she said, placing her hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "You did well, Catherine. You accepted your role as guardian and allowed the forest to express itself through you." "I didn't do it alone," Catherine replied, looking gratefully at the two. "Without you, without Claire." As if invoked by her words, the journalist appeared among the trees, accompanied by something unexpected. A group of reporters, photographers, and videographers from major media outlets. "I brought reinforcements," Claire announced with a triumphant smile. "The images I sent last night were enough to convince my contacts in New York. They want to see with their own eyes what's happening here." The journalists spread throughout the clearing, recording New Dawn's abandoned equipment, the marks of the interrupted operation, and mainly, the new rock formation covered by vegetation that seemed to have grown organically from the soil itself. A man in a suit approached the group, introducing himself as a representative of the Environmental Protection Agency. "The complaints we Beamwine received are extremely serious," he explained. "Illegal operation in a protected area, falsification of environmental documents, attempted land grabbing. We're here to investigate and take appropriate measures." "And what about the men trapped in the cave?" asked Gabriel, pointing to the sealed entrance. The representative looked perplexed at the rock formation. "What cave? I don't see any entrance." Catherine, Gabriel, and Ruth exchanged significant looks. The forest was protecting its secrets, allowing only those with the proper connection to perceive the true nature of the place. "I received information that New Dawn employees were conducting illegal excavations in this area," continued the representative. "But it seems they abandoned the site in a hurry. We found vehicles on the main road, but no sign of the operators." As the man spoke, Catherine felt a familiar presence. Thunder emerged from the vegetation, majestic and calm, approaching the group without the slightest apprehension. The journalists instinctively stepped back, but the buffalo ignored them, heading directly to Catherine. "Is it yours?" asked one of the reporters, amazed at the docility of the wild animal. "No," Catherine answered with a smile. "He belongs to the forest. We're just friends." In the days that followed, the story of Black Ridge's resistance against New Dawn's predatory exploitation gained national headlines. The evidence gathered by Claire, added to the discoveries of environmental authorities, triggered a broad investigation that revealed a network of corruption involving public officials, falsification of environmental licenses, and criminal business practices. New Dawn Enterprises saw its stocks plummet on the stock exchange when the first signs of fraud became public. Investors withdrew their support, partners terminated contracts, and the company that Thomas Madison had built with such cunning began to crumble as rapidly as the cave that had imprisoned him. As for Thomas and his team, they were officially reported as missing. Searches were conducted in the region, but no trace was found. To the outside world, it was as if they had simply evaporated in the dense forest of Black Ridge. Only Catherine, with her new expanded perception, knew the truth. Each dawn, she would sit in the clearing and tune into the Earth's energy. She could feel Thomas and the others still alive, in a space created by the forest itself, not a cruel prison, but a place of reflection where time flowed differently. The me. Forest isn't vindictive, she explained to Gabriel as they walked through Ruth's property on an autumn morning. It doesn't want to punish them, just protect itself and give them time to understand. Time? How much time? Catherine shrugged. Maybe. Years, maybe decades. When they're ready, when they truly understand the value of life beyond exploitation, the forest will find a way to free them. Ruth's property had been officially transformed into a protected environmental reserve under the management of a foundation created specifically for this purpose. The family house remained at the center, now surrounded by research laboratories, educational facilities, and lodgings for researchers and students who came from all over the country to learn about Black Ridge's unique ecosystem. Catherine had assumed the scientific direction of the project, uniting her academic knowledge with the ancestral wisdom transmitted by her grandmother. Together, they mapped the medicinal properties of local plants, developed sustainable management techniques, and, above all, taught about the deep interconnection between all living beings. Gabriel coordinated the educational program, receiving schools and universities, translating complex scientific concepts into accessible language, helping to form a new generation aware of the importance of preserving natural balance. Claire, with her journalistic talent, became the spokesperson for the reserve, reporting discoveries, sharing inspiring stories, and keeping alive the memory of the near disaster that had motivated the creation of the sanctuary. On a particularly serene afternoon, as Catherine and Ruth sat on the porch observing the setting sun tinging the sky with orange hues, the young guardian noticed something extraordinary: small seedlings sprouting in a circular pattern around the property. These weren't common plants. Their silvery stems and slightly luminous leaves revealed their origin. "The heart of the ridge is spreading," she observed, amazed. Ruth nodded, a serene smile on her wrinkled face. "The central tree is sending its children, creating new energy nuclei, expanding its influence. This is how the forest adapts, evolves, and strengthens itself." "Does this mean that your work as a guardian is just beginning?" her grandmother completed. "Each of these new trees will need protection as it grows, guidance as it establishes its own connections with the web of life." Catherine contemplated the immense responsibility that the future held, but felt no fear. The connection she had discovered within herself, the deep bond with nature that now defined her existence, provided her with a tranquil confidence she had never experienced before. Thunder appeared at the edge of the yard as he did every afternoon, his wise gaze fixed on the guardian he had helped awaken. Other animals were beginning to gather around him: a golden-maned wolf, an owl perched on his back, a couple of howler monkeys in nearby trees. Catherine's non-human family, her allies and friends in the journey that was just beginning. "Sometimes I wonder," said Catherine, observing the small animal council, "if this was always destined to happen. If my move to New York, my scientific training, even New Dawn's ambition, if it all wasn't part of a larger plan to bring me back at the right moment." Ruth smiled, her eyes reflecting the wisdom accumulated through a life of communion with the forest. "Life rarely follows straight paths, my child. Sometimes we need to move away to truly understand where we should go. Your journey away was necessary for your return to have meaning." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, bringing with it the aroma of moist earth and lush vegetation. It was the perfume of the living forest in constant renewal, the same aroma that had welcomed Catherine upon her return, that had guided her in her discovery, that was now an integral part of her being. In the small clearing where it all began, the first seedling sent by the central tree already reached the height of a child. Its leaves glowed softly in the twilight, a silent promise that the cycle would continue, that the balance would be preserved. not by the efforts of a single guardian, but by the eternal dance between all beings that shared that sacred space, from the smallest bacterium to the oldest tree, from the simplest insect to the most complex mammal, an invisible web of life, sustained by the love and respect that Catherine had rediscovered upon returning to her roots. And as night gently descended upon Black Ridge, the guardian felt the forest whisper in her heart a single word: "We continue."